Being left out feels like a wound long before you understand it as anything else. The invitation that never came. The gathering you heard about afterward. The conversation that closed the moment you walked into the room. You spend years reading these moments as evidence that something in you fell short. But here is what almost nobody tells you, and what you have felt in your body without ever having words for it. Much of what looked like rejection was protection. The door that stayed shut was keeping something out of your life, not keeping you out of theirs. There is a difference between being excluded and being spared, and most people never learn to tell them apart. They spend decades collecting the times they were left behind, adding them up like debts, carrying the total as proof of their own unworthiness. And all the while, a quieter arithmetic was running underneath. Some of those rooms you were kept out of were rooms you would have suffered in. Some of those tables you were not seated at were tables where you would have been slowly diminished, one small remark at a time. You mistook the closed door for a mirror. It was never a mirror. It was a wall. And walls keep things out for reasons the person standing outside them rarely gets to see. This is the thing you were never told, that not every exclusion is a punishment, that some of it is a gift you did not recognize because it arrived disguised as loss. The disguise is the whole problem. Protection almost never announces itself as protection. It comes wearing the face of rejection, and you feel the sting first and understand the mercy last, if you understand it at all. And so the loss gets recorded and the mercy gets missed, and a person can go their whole life mistaking their rescues for their defeats. There are 3 signs that what looks like rejection is actually protection, and by the time this is finished, you will be able to name all 3 when they appear. You will look back at your own life and see them scattered across the years, moments you grieved that were quietly saving you. And you will look forward with different eyes, so that the next time a door closes, you feel something other than shame. You will feel the sting, yes. That does not leave. But underneath the sting, you will begin to hear the older question asking itself, and you will have the composure to wait for its answer. But first, there is something older to understand, because the sign means nothing until you know why it works this way. Consider how much of a life is spent trying to get in, trying to be included, chosen, kept. From their earliest years, there is a hunger to belong that never fully leaves. It is one of the oldest things in a person. To be part of the group meant safety once, meant survival. And the body still remembers this, even when the mind has moved on. So when you are left out, something ancient in you sounds an alarm. It does not measure whether the group was good for you. It only measures that you are outside it. That is why exclusion hurts the way it does. The pain is real, but the pain is not always telling you the truth about your worth. Understand what this alarm actually is, because once you understand it, you can stop obeying it blindly. The alarm is old machinery. It was built for a time when to be cast out of the group was to be left without food, without shelter, without protection from the dark. In that world, exclusion could kill you, and so the fear of it was written deep, deeper than thought, deeper than reason. But you do not live in that world anymore. Being left out of a circle will not leave you to starve. It will leave you, at worst, briefly alone. And yet the alarm does not know the difference. It rings just as loudly for a lost dinner invitation as it would have rung for banishment from the tribe. The first act of discernment is learning to hear that alarm and say to it quietly, "I know why you are ringing, and I know you are wrong about the danger." There is a strange trick in this alarm that keeps most people captive to it their whole lives. It does not only ring louder than the truth, It rings faster. It reaches its conclusion before your reason has even sat down to consider the facts. By the time you have thought a single clear thought about the exclusion, the alarm has already delivered its verdict, and the verdict is always the same. You are outside, and outside is death, and someone must be to blame, and the someone is you. That is the whole message, delivered in a half a second, before any evidence arrives. And so people spend their lives reacting not to what happened, but to an ancient siren that cannot read the present at all. Learn to let the siren finish ringing before you decide anything. It will always ring first. It does not get to rule. Here is what happens to a person who never questions this. They spend their whole life trying to be admitted to rooms that would have cost them their peace. They contort themselves. They soften their opinions, dim their presence, laugh at what does not deserve laughter, all to remain inside a circle that was never good for them to begin with. And when that circle finally closes them out, they mourn it as a failure. They never stop to ask what they were actually being excluded from. They only know they are outside, and outside feels like death to the old machinery. And so they spend their strength trying to get back in, never once weighing whether in was a place worth being. What you were excluded from matters more than the fact of the exclusion. Say that to yourself slowly. It reverses the entire habit of a lifetime. Most people, when left out, put all their attention on the leaving out. Almost none of them turn their attention to the thing itself, to the actual room, the actual table, the actual people, and ask whether it was ever good. But that is the only question that carries any truth in it. The fact of exclusion tells you nothing. The nature of what you were excluded from tells you everything. Think of it this way. A person shows you who they are and how they treat you, and a group shows you what it is and who it keeps and who it releases. When a group closes ranks against you, one of two things is true. Either you were unwilling to become what that group required, or you were incapable of it. And in both cases, the closing of that door is telling you something honest about the fit between you and them. It is not always telling you that you are less. Sometimes it is telling you that you are different in a way that could not survive there without erosion. There is a cost to belonging that nobody names. Every group has a price of admission, and the price is rarely money. The price is usually a piece of yourself. Some groups ask for a small piece, and the belonging is worth it. Other groups ask for the center of you, and the belonging is a slow surrender. When you are kept out of the second kind, you have been spared a transaction that would have hollowed you. You just could not see it, because all you felt was the sting of the closed door. Learn to read the price before you mourn the exclusion. Ask what that group required of the people it kept. Did it require them to be quieter than they were, smaller than they were, crueler than they wished to be? Did it require them to laugh along, to look away, to lower their standards to match the room? Did it require a slow erasure of everything that made them singular? Look at the ones who were admitted, and look at what they became inside. That is the price of admission, made visible in the people who paid it. And if the price was the center of themselves, then being kept out was not a loss. It was a refund on a purchase you never had to make. There is a way to see this price even when the group hides it well, and it is worth learning. Watch what happens to a newcomer in the months after they are welcomed. Watch whether they grow larger or smaller inside that circle. Watch whether their laugh gets more honest or more nervous, whether they speak their own mind more freely or begin to check every word against the room. A healthy belonging expands the people inside it. A costly belonging contracts them quietly over time, until the person who walked in bright and full walks around a year later careful and dimmed. If the price of admission is a slow dimming, then the closed door spared you the dimming. You keep looking at the light you were denied. Look instead at the light that went out in the ones who got in. This is why self-respect changes everything. When a person carries genuine self-respect, they stop reading every exclusion as a verdict. They begin to ask a better question. Not why was I left out, but what was I left out of, and would it have been good for me? That single shift changes the whole emotional weather of a life, because now the closed door is information, not condemnation. Now you can stand in front of it with composure instead of collapsing in front of it in shame. Notice how people calibrate their treatment of you to the self-regard they see in you. A group that senses you are desperate to be included will use that desperation. They will let you hover at the edge, feed you just enough to keep you hoping, and never quite let you all the way in. That is not belonging, that is bait. And the people who never get free of it are the ones who need the belonging too much to walk away from it. The people who protect their own peace are the ones who can look at that dynamic and simply step back. Their carriage changes. Something in how they hold themselves tells the group, I do not need this enough to be humiliated by it. And once that is true, the whole game loses its hold. This calibration is happening constantly, whether you see it or not. Watch it in the smallest gestures. The person who is a little too eager gets treated a little more carelessly, every time. The person who can take or leave the invitation gets pursued. This is not fair and it is not kind, but it is how the machinery works, and pretending otherwise only leaves you at the mercy of it. The self-regard you carry into a room arrives before your words do. People read it in your posture, in how long you wait to be acknowledged, in whether you fill every silence out of fear that the silence means rejection. They read it and they price you accordingly. Raise your own regard for yourself, and the price others put on you rises to meet it. Lower it, and watch how quickly you are discounted. Here is the deeper thing. Rejection often reveals more about the one rejecting than the one rejected. A group that excludes out of fear, out of envy, out of a need to keep its own hierarchy intact, is showing you its interior. It is showing you what it protects and what it punishes. When you are the one punished, look closely at what that group rewards instead. Often you will find that being kept out was the higher position, that the ones who were welcomed had to pay in ways you were unwilling to pay. This is not a comfort you can hand someone. It is a discernment they have to grow into. But once it is grown, it is permanent. You have lived long enough to have proof of this already. Somewhere in your past is a circle you long to be part of that later revealed itself to be something you were fortunate to escape. A friendship that closed against you and then, years on, showed you what it had become and what you would have become inside it. A place you were not chosen for, that would have chained you to a version of your life you can now hardly bear to imagine. You did not know it then. The exclusion felt like a small death, but the years turned it into a rescue. That is the pattern. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. It runs backward through everything. The job you did not get that would have swallowed a decade of your life. The person who chose someone else, freeing you for the one who would actually stay. The group that shut you out just before it collapsed into the very cruelty it had been rehearsing on others. You were spared, again and again, by doors you wept over. The tears were honest, but the doors were kind. So understand this before we name the first sign. Not everything that keeps you out is against you. Some of it is for you, working in a language you had not yet learned to read. The task is not to stop feeling the sting. The sting is human, and there is no shame in it. The task is to feel the sting, and then, when the heat of it has passed, to ask the older question underneath, what was this keeping me from? And to be honest enough to hear the answer, even when the answer is that the closed door was the kindest thing that happened to you that year. The first sign that an exclusion was protection is this: you feel relief underneath the hurt, and the relief lasts longer than the hurt does. This is the sign most people miss, because the two feelings arrive together and the hurt is louder. When you are left out of something, the first wave is pain. That is natural and it deserves no apology. But underneath the pain, if you are quiet enough to notice, there is often a second current running the other way, a loosening in the chest, a breath that comes easier than it has in a while, a part of you that, against all logic, is glad. People rush to bury that second feeling because it seems disloyal to their own hurt. They think, I should not be relieved. I should be devastated. So they smother the relief and keep only the grief, and in doing so they lose the truest signal they were given. Why does this happen? Because the body knows things the mind refuses to admit. Long before you can articulate that a group was bad for you, your body has been keeping the ledger. The tension you carried before every gathering. The way you rehearsed conversations in advance and replayed them for days afterward, wondering what you had done wrong. The fatigue that settled over you on the drive home. Your body counted every one of those costs, even while your mind was busy pretending the belonging was worth it. So when the door finally closes and you feel that unexpected loosening, that is your body telling you the truth it always knew. You were tired there. You were performing there. You were not at peace there. Learn to read the small signals your body leaves for you, because they are more honest than any thought you can have about a place. Notice how you sleep the week after the exclusion. Notice whether your jaw is looser, whether the low hum of dread you had grown used to has gone quiet. Notice whether you eat better, laugh more easily, catch yourself humming in a way you had not for a long time. These are not coincidences. These are the reports coming in from a part of you that never lied. The mind can talk itself into anything. It can convince you that the room that exhausted you was the room you needed. The body does not have that talent. The body simply registers whether you are at ease, and it tells you the answer in the only language it has, which is sensation. When the sensation after an exclusion is ease, you have your answer, and it does not matter what the mind insists. There is a way to make this reading more exact, and it costs you nothing but attention. Cast your mind back over the last stretch of time you spent inside that circle, and notice where in your body you felt it. Most people can find it once they look, a tightness across the shoulders that arrived in the parking lot before every gathering, a knot low in the stomach when a certain name appeared on the phone, a held breath in a certain person's presence that you only noticed you were holding when you finally left. These were not moods. They were verdicts, delivered by the one part of you that cannot be flattered and cannot be fooled. Your body was voting on that room long before your mind was willing to count the ballots. Now that the door has closed, go back and count them. The tally was there all along. Relief is the tell. Grief without relief is a real loss, and those exist, and they deserve mourning. But grief laced with relief is something else entirely. It is the sound of a burden being set down. And the way to know which one you are holding is simply time. A true loss gets heavier before it gets lighter. A protection disguised as loss gets lighter almost immediately and stays light. And a month on you can hardly remember why the door closing felt like the end of the world. Consider a person who was slowly pushed to the margins of a circle they had been part of for years. At first there was only bewilderment and hurt. They lay awake going over every interaction, hunting for the mistake. But within weeks, something shifted. They noticed they no longer dreaded certain evenings. They noticed their shoulders had come down from around their ears. They noticed they were saying what they actually thought, out loud, in their own kitchen, without first checking whether it would be acceptable. The exclusion they had grieved had handed them back their own presence. They had not lost a place. They had recovered a self. Consider another. A person who had spent years as the one everyone called when they needed something. The fixer, the listener, the one who could always be counted on to show up. When the group reorganized itself around someone newer and stopped calling, the hurt was sharp, because so much of who they thought they were had been built on being needed. But in the silence that followed, something they had not felt in decades came back. Whole evenings that belonged to them, hours that no one had a claim on. They had mistaken being used for being loved. And the exclusion, brutal as it felt, drew the line between the two so clearly that they could never again confuse them. Solitude returned to them what a life of being needed had quietly taken away. So here is what to do when you feel that unexpected relief. Do not rush to bury it. Sit with it. Let it be as real to you as the hurt is. Ask it plainly. What were you afraid of in that room? What did you set down when that door closed? The answers will tell you whether you were rejected or released. And if the relief keeps coming, week after week, quietly insisting that you are lighter now, believe it. Your body kept a more honest record than your longing ever did. The relief is not disloyalty to your pain. The relief is the deeper truth arriving late. The second sign is quieter and harder, and it takes more honesty to see. You were excluded because you would not shrink, and the group required shrinking. Some rooms only admit people who make themselves smaller to enter them. You do not always notice this until you are the one who would not do it. There are circles held together not by warmth but by a shared agreement about who is allowed to be too much. And in those circles, a person who carries themselves fully, who takes up their natural space, who does not apologize for their own presence, becomes a problem. Not because they did anything wrong, because their fullness exposes the smallness everyone else agreed to. So the group closes against them and calls it 100 other things, and never once admits the real reason. The real reason is that you would not shrink, and they could not forgive you for it. This is worth sitting with, because it inverts everything you were taught to feel. You were taught that being left out meant you were not good enough, but this second sign points the other way entirely. Sometimes you are left out because you were too much of yourself for a space built on self-diminishment. Your quiet strength read as arrogance to people who had never allowed themselves any strength at all. Your refusal to gossip read as coldness to people whose bond was gossip. Your standards read as judgment to people who had quietly lowered theirs and needed everyone around them to lower theirs too, so that no one would have to see clearly what they had settled for. Watch how this works, because it is subtle. A group with low standards does not experience your high standards as neutral. They experience them as an accusation. Your restraint at the table where everyone else overindulges is felt as a rebuke, even if you say nothing. Your composure in the meeting where everyone else is performing anxiety is felt as superiority, even though you are only being calm. You become the mirror nobody asked for, and rather than change what they see in the mirror, they remove the mirror. That removal is the exclusion. And it has almost nothing to do with your worth and almost everything to do with what your presence forced them to notice about themselves. There is a particular loneliness to this kind of exclusion, and it is worth naming so you are not blindsided by it. When you are cast out for being too much, the people casting you out will not tell you the truth of it. They will not say, "Your dignity made us uncomfortable. Your steadiness reminded us of what we abandoned in ourselves." They will say, "You were difficult." They will say, "You thought you were better than everyone." They will say, "You did not fit." And they will say it in a tone that makes you doubt everything solid in you. This is the cruelty inside this particular sign. It attacks precisely the thing that was good. It takes your dignity and hands it back to you renamed as a flaw. And if you are not careful, you will accept the renaming, and you will file down the very edge that was your strength. Do not accept the renaming. What they called arrogance was carriage. What they called coldness was discernment. What they called judgment was a standard they could not meet and so decided to resent. But there is something almost nobody sees here, and it is the part that will free you if you let it. The renaming is not an insult. It is a confession. When a group tells you that you thought you were better than them, they are telling you that your presence made them feel their own smallness, and they could not bear it. That is not a statement about your arrogance. It is a statement about their shame. People do not accuse you of superiority because you look down on them. They accuse you of it because standing next to you they were forced to look down on themselves, and they would rather be angry at you than sit with that. So when you hear the renaming, translate it. Every cruel word aimed at your dignity is a report on what your dignity revealed. Read it that way, and it stops wounding you. It starts informing you. Here is the hard part, and it is why this sign requires so much honesty. You have to be able to distinguish between the exclusion that came from your dignity and the exclusion that came from your defensiveness. Not every time you were left out was because you were too magnificent to tolerate. Sometimes you were genuinely difficult in ways worth examining. The discernment lies in asking, honestly, was I keeping a boundary or was I building a wall? Was I holding a standard or was I holding a grudge? Was I carrying myself with dignity or was I carrying myself with contempt for everyone around me? Only you can answer that, and only if you answer it without flattering yourself. There is a clean test for this, if you are willing to use it. A boundary is quiet. It protects your own peace and asks nothing of anyone else. A wall is loud. It announces itself. It punishes. It wants the other person to feel shut out. If your exclusion followed a season of you quietly keeping to your own standards without making anyone wrong for theirs, then it was dignity, and you were cast out for it, and there is no shame in that. But if your exclusion followed a season of you holding everyone in contempt, correcting them, making sure they knew you disapproved, then some of that closed door was your own hand pushing it shut. The difference matters, because you can only learn from the second kind, and you can only honor the first. Confuse them, and you will either spend your life apologizing for your dignity or defending your contempt, and both are wasted lives. There is a second test worth keeping beside the first. Ask whether your standard cost only you, or whether it costs the people around you too. A true standard is something you hold yourself to. You keep your own restraint, your own composure, your own quiet, and you let everyone else be as they are. A standard that has curdled into contempt is one you begin to enforce on others. You sigh at them. You correct them. You let them feel your disapproval like a draft under the door. The first kind of standard makes you unshrinkable, and it costs the group nothing but the mirror. The second kind makes you exhausting, and the exclusion that follows it is at least partly earned. Be honest about which one you are carrying. Your dignity does not need defending. Only your contempt does. And the moment you find yourself defending it, you have your answer. Consider a person who was pushed out of a long-standing circle after they stopped participating in the running commentary about everyone who was absent. They did not announce it. They did not lecture anyone. They simply went quiet when the conversation turned cruel, and stayed quiet again and again until their silence became unbearable to the people who needed a full chorus for their cruelty to feel acceptable. The group did not say, "We are excluding you because your silence shames us." They said other things, vaguer things. But that was the truth of it. Their restraint had become an indictment, and the group could not hold both the restraint and their own comfort at the same time. So they let the restraint go, and then letting it go, they let go of a person who had more integrity than the whole circle combined. Consider another. A person who simply refused to be available at all hours, who stopped answering the phone at midnight for the same drama that had been playing out unchanged for years. They set no ultimatum. They made no speech. They just stopped rushing in and let the people who had leaned on them learn to stand on their own. The group experienced this quiet withdrawal as betrayal, though nothing had been betrayed except their assumption of endless access. They closed ranks, and the one who had withdrawn discovered that most of what had felt like closeness was really only dependence wearing the mask of friendship. When the dependence had nowhere to attach, the friendship revealed how little of it had ever been real. What to do with this sign is the most demanding thing yet. When you are left out, before you conclude that you were too much of yourself, do the honest audit. Look hard at whether you were holding dignity or performing superiority. If it was genuine dignity, if you truly were excluded for refusing to shrink, then let the exclusion stand as proof of something good in you rather than something broken. Do not go back and shrink to be readmitted. That is the one response that turns a protection into a wound. The whole point of being kept out for your fullness is that your fullness was worth keeping. Diminish it to get back in, and you have paid the price the group wanted all along, just later than they hoped. The third sign is the one that takes the longest to trust, because it asks you to read the future backward. The exclusion made room for something you could not yet see, and you will only recognize it in hindsight. A closed door does more than shut you out. It turns you around. It sends you looking in another direction, toward rooms and people and possibilities you would never have found if the first door had stayed open. This is the hardest sign to feel in the moment, because in the moment there is no other room in sight. There is only the door that closed and the cold outside it. But time is the great translator here. Time takes the exclusion you grieved and reveals what it cleared the way for. The people you would never have met if you had stayed inside the old circle. The version of yourself that only came into being because you were forced to stand somewhere new. Understand why this is so difficult to accept while it is happening. When you are left out, all your attention is on the loss. The mind cannot imagine what does not yet exist, so it grieves the concrete thing that is gone and remains blind to the abstract thing that is coming. You cannot mourn a possibility that has not arrived, but you also cannot see it, and so the closed door feels like pure subtraction, nothing added, only taken away. It is only later, sometimes years later, that you look back and see the whole shape of it, that the door had to close for the next thing to open, that if you had gotten what you begged for, you would never have found what you actually needed. This is not a comforting story people tell themselves to feel better about disappointment. It is a structural truth about how a life moves. A life has limited room. Every attachment occupies space. As long as you were straining toward the circle that excluded you, you were not available to anything else. Your energy was pointed backward toward the closed door, knocking. The exclusion, brutal as it felt, turned you to face forward. It emptied the space that the next thing needed in order to arrive. You cannot pour into a cup that is already full, and you cannot walk toward a new life while your whole body is angled toward a door that will not open. Think of how much space a single longing can occupy. When you want badly to be led into a place, that wanting is not a small thing tucked away in a corner of you. It spreads. It colors your mornings and disturbs your sleep. It bends your conversations toward it. It shapes the choices you make about where to go and whom to see, all quietly organized around the hope of being admitted. A person consumed by one closed door is not fully present anywhere else, because a part of them is always back at that door, waiting. This is the hidden cost of refusing to let go. You do not only lose the room you were shut out of, you lose your availability to every other room, for as long as your attention stays fixed on the one that is closed. There is a further cost that hides underneath even that one. While your attention stays pinned to the closed door, the people who would gladly open their own doors to you stand there unseen. They are around you already, some of them. The quiet ones who value you, who would welcome you fully, who ask nothing of you but your honest presence. But you cannot see them, because you are facing the wrong way. A person angled toward a rejection is blind to every acceptance on offer. This is the cruelest arithmetic of holding on. It is not only that you keep the wound open, it is that you leave the healing unclaimed, standing patiently in your peripheral vision, waiting for you to turn your head. Turn your head. Some of what you have been aching for has been quietly waiting behind you the whole time. Here is where detachment becomes the quiet hinge of everything. Detachment is not coldness, and it is not giving up. Detachment is the ability to release your grip on a door that is closed, and to turn, and to face whatever is next with an open hand instead of a clenched one. The people who suffer longest from exclusion are the ones who will not detach. They keep the door alive in their minds for years, rehearsing what they could have said, imagining what it would have been like inside, refusing to accept that it is finished. And all that time, the room that was meant for them stands empty because they never turned around to see it. The exclusion protected them. Their refusal to detach undid the protection. Consider a person who spent a long season devastated at being passed over, left out of something they had wanted with their whole heart. For a while they could see nothing but the loss. Then, because life leaves you no choice but to keep moving, they found themselves in unfamiliar rooms, among unfamiliar people, doing things they would never have done if the first thing had gone their way. And somewhere in those unfamiliar rooms, a life took shape that was truer to who they actually were than anything the old circle could have given them. Years on, they could barely stand to think about how close they had come to getting what they wanted, because getting it would have cost them everything they found instead. So here is what to do when you are freshly excluded and there is no other room in sight. You do not have to believe, in that raw moment, that something better is coming. You cannot force that belief, and you should not fake it. What you can do is refuse to seal yourself shut. Keep one hand open. Do not spend the coming months knocking on the closed door. Turn, even slightly, and let yourself be available to what you cannot yet see. Practice the detachment not as a feeling but as an action. Stop replaying it. Stop rehearsing it. Stop asking to be let back in. And trust, not with your emotions but with your conduct, that the space this cleared was cleared for a reason you will understand later. Now comes the harder part, because knowing the signs is not the same as knowing what to do with your own life once you believe them. There are concrete things you can do, and they fall into three kinds. The first kind of action is about how you read the moment when it happens. When a door closes, Your first instinct will be to make it mean something about your worth. And that instinct is fast and it is wrong. So the first practical thing is to slow the meaning down. When you learn you were left out, notice the story your mind immediately writes. Something is wrong with me. I am not enough. They see something in me that makes me unwelcome. Notice that story, and then set it aside. Not because it is false with certainty, but because it is too fast to be trusted. Give the moment a week before you decide what it means. Feel the hurt now, but postpone the verdict. Most of the cruelest conclusions people reach about themselves are reached in the first hour, when the pain is loudest and the truth is quietest. There is a discipline in this that is worth naming plainly. The mind is a fast machine, and it writes stories at the speed of feeling. And the stories it writes in pain are almost always about your own unworthiness, because that is the oldest groove and the story slides most easily into it. But a story written that fast has no evidence in it. It has only the old alarm and the old groove. So when you catch the story forming, do not argue with it. Arguing keeps you inside it. Simply notice it, name it as a story, and set it down. I notice I am telling myself I am not enough. That much is true, that you are telling yourself that. Whether it is so is a separate matter, and it cannot be decided in the first hour, and it should not be. Postpone the verdict the way a careful judge postpones a ruling until the evidence is fully heard. The evidence, in this case, is time, and time has not spoken yet. Within that same first kind of action, learn to ask the two questions that change everything. What was I left out of, and would it truly have been good for me? Sit down and answer them plainly. Write down what that circle actually was, not what you wished it were. What did it cost you to be near it? Who were you when you were inside it? And did you like that person? Was that a room where your dignity was safe, or a room where you had to check it at the door every time? These questions move you out of the position of the rejected and into the position of the one doing the evaluating. And that shift alone will restore something to your carriage that the exclusion tried to take. Ask a third question too, quietly, after the first two. Who was I becoming there? Not who was I in a single evening, but who was that room slowly turning me into over months and years? Because groups do not only occupy your time, they shape you. You come to resemble the people you spend your hours with, in your speech, in your standards, in the size you allow yourself to be. So look at the trajectory. If you had stayed inside that circle for another 10 years, who would you have become? If the honest answer is someone smaller, someone more bitter, someone who had traded away a little more of themselves each year to keep their seat, then the exclusion did not rob you. It stopped a slow theft that had already been running for a long time. And ask a fourth, the plainest of all, when I imagine that door reopening tomorrow and being welcomed back in, what do I actually feel? Watch the answer arrive before you can arrange it. If what rises is pure gladness, clean and light, then perhaps that was a real belonging, and its loss is a real grief. But if what rises is a small dread folded inside the wanting, a bracing of the shoulders, a quiet part of you that would have to gather itself to walk back through, then you have learned something the daylight story was hiding. You do not truly want back in. You only want to not have been left out. Those are different hungers, and most people spend years feeding the second while calling it the first. The exclusion you are grieving may be one you would quietly refuse if it were offered back to you. The second kind of action is about your conduct in the aftermath, because what you do after being left out determines whether the exclusion becomes a wound or a boundary. The single most important thing here is restraint. When you are excluded, there is a powerful pull to react, to demand an explanation, to confront, to plead your case, to perform your hurt where they can see it, hoping it will move them. Resist all of it. Silence in the aftermath of exclusion is not weakness. It is the most powerful thing you can offer. When you go quiet and steady, instead of loud and wounded, you tell everyone watching that your peace does not depend on their approval. And nothing rewrites the meaning of an exclusion faster than the excluded person walking away with their composure fully intact. Understand what silence does. That argument cannot. When you argue, you hand the other person a role to play. You give them something to push against, and the pushing keeps you both bound together, locked in the same struggle, your energy feeding theirs. But when you meet exclusion with silence, there is nothing to push against. Your quiet does not fight, and so it cannot be fought. It simply stands, complete in itself, needing nothing from anyone. And that is what people find hardest to bear from someone they have shut out, because it tells them, without a single word, that their rejection did not land where they aimed it. Silence is not the absence of a response. Silence is a response, and it is the one that cannot be argued with, because it makes no claim to defend. It only shows a person at peace, and there is no counter-argument to peace. Part of this conduct is refusing to explain yourself to people committed to misreading you. This is one of the hardest disciplines a person ever learns. When you have been left out, you want desperately to be understood. You want to correct the record, to make them see you as you really are. But some people have already decided who you are, and no amount of explanation will move them, because your misreading serves them. It justifies the exclusion. It lets them off the hook. Every word you spend explaining yourself to such a person is a word wasted, and worse, it hands them the satisfaction of watching you try. Let the misreading stand. Let it be their error to carry. Your refusal to defend yourself against a fixed mind is not surrender. It is the highest form of self-respect available to you in that situation. There is a heavy cost to explaining yourself to someone committed to misreading you, and it goes beyond the wasted words. Every time you explain, you accept the premise that their judgment of you is the thing that must be corrected, that their verdict is the court in which your worth is decided. That premise is the real trap. The moment you stop explaining, you withdraw your case from their court entirely. You stop treating their misreading as a problem you are obligated to solve. And something quiet and enormous shifts in you when you do this. You stop belonging to their opinion of you. Your dignity stops depending on whether they got you right. Let them be wrong about you. Their wrongness is not a debt you owe, and it is not yours to pay off with endless explanation. There is a way to know when you have truly withdrawn from that court, and it is a good thing to watch for. You will notice that their opinion of you stops itching. You will hear that they said something unkind about you, that they misrepresented what happened, that they gathered others to their version of the story, and instead of the old scramble to correct it, you will feel a strange, flat calm. Not coldness, not the effort of not caring, simply a quiet that comes because the thing they are fighting for, your defense, your explanation, your visible distress, is no longer available to them, because you no longer keep it in stock. This is what detachment feels like from the inside. It is not that you stopped feeling, it is that you stopped bleeding on demand. Their misreading became weather happening to someone else, out there, and you stayed dry inside your own composure. Also, in this second kind of action, protect your peace by controlling your own attention. After an exclusion, the mind wants to return to it constantly, to pick at it like a scab. Every time you replay the moment, you deepen the wound and you keep the door alive. So the practical discipline is to notice when your mind returns there and to gently turn it away, not by force, not by pretending you do not care, but by simply declining to feed it. Give your attention to what is in front of you, to the people who actually value you, to the work of your own days. The exclusion loses its power over you at exactly the rate at which you stop rehearsing it. This is not denial. This is the quiet management of your own inner life, which is the one territory that is entirely yours to govern. Give yourself a plain rule for this, because the mind does not respond to good intentions, only to practice. When you catch yourself back at the closed door, replaying the scene for the 100th time, do not scold yourself. Simply return your attention to one real thing in front of you, the cup in your hand, the light in the window, the task on the table. Each time you do this, you are not suppressing the thought. You are teaching your attention where its home is, and its home is here, in the present, not back at a door that will not open. Do this 100 times a day if you must. The exclusion is fed by rehearsal, and rehearsal is a habit, and habits weaken the moment you stop performing them. You are not obligated to think about the people who shut you out. That is a choice you make over and over, and you are allowed to start choosing otherwise. There is one more piece of conduct that matters more than people expect, and it is what you do with your speech about the ones who left you out. When you speak of them to others again and again, cataloging the slight, gathering allies to your side of it, you keep the exclusion breathing. You give it a place to live outside your own head, and you drag it into every room you enter, so that even the rooms that welcome you become rooms about the room that did not. The discipline here is to let it go quiet on your tongue as well as in your mind, not to pretend it did not happen if someone asks, simply to stop volunteering it, stop feeding it into conversations, stop making the closed door the subject of your open ones. A person who has stopped talking about the wound is most of the way to being done with it. Your silence about them is the final proof that you have turned around and started walking. The third kind of action is about what you build going forward, because the deepest response to being left out is not to get better at being included. It is to build a life so aligned with who you are that inclusion in the wrong room stops mattering to you. This begins with getting clear about your own standards. What do you actually require of the people and places you give your time to? Most people have never named this. They have vague wishes but no clear standards, and so they drift into circles by accident and then suffer when those circles reject them. Name your standards. Decide what a room has to be for you to want to be in it. Once you have real standards, being excluded from a room that fails to meet them stops feeling like a loss at all. You cannot be devastated by exclusion from a place you would not have chosen to stay. Make those standards specific, because a vague standard cannot protect you. Do not stop at wanting kindness or wanting honesty. Decide what those things look like in the small hours of an ordinary day. A room worth your time is one where you can disagree without paying for it later. A room worth your time is one where the people speak as well of the absent as they do of the present. A room worth your time is one where you leave lighter than you arrived, not heavier, more yourself, and not less. Write those down in plain words you can hold up against any circle. Then hold them up. When you have a specific standard in your hand, the exclusion sorts itself in an instant. Either the room met the standard, in which case its loss is worth grieving, or it did not, in which case being kept out of it was the standard doing its quiet work on your behalf. Building forward also means investing in the few relationships that meet those standards, rather than chasing the many that do not. There is a temptation, especially after being left out, to widen the net, to try to be liked by more people, to fill the emptiness with quantity. This is exactly backward. The cure for the wrong belonging is not more belonging. It is deeper belonging in fewer places, with people who value you rather than merely tolerate you. The difference between being liked and being valued is the whole of it. Many people will like you when you are useful to them and forget you when you are not. Few people will value you for who you are regardless of what you provide. Spend your remaining years pouring into the few, and you will find that the exclusions of the many stop registering at all. Learn to tell being liked from being valued, because the two feel similar and cost you very differently. Being liked is pleasant and cheap and conditional. It comes when you are useful, when you are agreeable, when you make no demands and cause no discomfort, and it withdraws the moment any of that changes. Being valued is different. It holds even when you are inconvenient. It survives your disagreement, your absence, your bad seasons. The person who values you does not need you to be useful in order to want you near. So look at your circles with this test in hand. Ask of each one whether they would still be there if you had nothing to offer. The ones who would are worth everything. The ones who would not were never belonging at all, only an arrangement. And there is no loss in being excluded from an arrangement. And building forward means making peace with solitude, because a person who cannot be alone will accept any belonging, no matter the cost, simply to avoid being by themselves. This is the hidden mechanism behind so much unnecessary suffering. People stay in circles that diminish them because the alternative, being alone, terrifies them more than being diminished does. But solitude is not the enemy here. Solitude is what returns you to yourself after decades of being needed, of being available, of being shaped by everyone else's expectations. A person who has grown comfortable in their own company becomes almost impossible to exploit through exclusion, because the threat of being left out has lost its teeth. You cannot be controlled by the fear of solitude once solitude has become a place you actually like to be. Notice what solitude gives back to a person who has spent a lifetime being needed. It gives back the sound of your own thoughts, which you may not have heard clearly in years, drowned as they were under everyone else's demands. It gives back the freedom to want what you want without first checking whether it is convenient for anyone else. It gives back a whole self that had been parceled out, a little to this person, a little to that one, until there was almost nothing left that belonged entirely to you. This is not loneliness. Loneliness is the ache of missing something. Solitude, when you have made peace with it, is the quiet fullness of being enough on your own. And the person who has arrived at that fullness cannot be threatened by any closed door, because they are already home inside themselves, and no one can shut them out of that. The way into that fullness is smaller and more ordinary than people expect. You do not become at ease with your own company by deciding to be. You become at ease with it by spending time there on purpose, in small measured amounts, until the silence stops feeling like an absence and starts feeling like a room you own. An evening with no plans that you do not rush to fill. A meal you take slowly with only your own thoughts for company. A morning you spend doing exactly what you please with no one to answer to. At first the old alarm will ring, telling you that being alone means something has gone wrong. Let it ring. Sit through it. On the other side of that ringing is a quiet you will come to prize above almost any invitation. And a person who prizes their own quiet cannot be starved into the wrong rooms because they are not hungry the way they used to be. There is a great deal at stake in whether you learn this or not, and it is worth being honest about what happens to the people who never do. Consider someone who spent their whole life reading every exclusion as a verdict on their worth. Every door that closed, they took as proof. They gathered these proofs across the decades until they had built an entire identity out of not being chosen. And because they believed so completely that the problem was them, they spent their years trying to earn their way back into rooms that had never deserved them. They shrank. They apologized for their own presence. They softened every edge until there was almost nothing left of the shape they had started with. And the strangest thing was that the shrinking never worked. The more they diminished themselves to be accepted, the less there was to accept, and the more easily they were left out again. They had misread the whole thing from the beginning. They thought the exclusions were happening because they were too much. In truth, by the end, they were being excluded because there was too little of them left to include. Watch what that costs a person over a lifetime. They arrive at the far end of their years having never once trusted that a closed door might have been a mercy. They carry every rejection as a fresh wound, even decades later, because they never learned to translate any of them into protection. Their memory is a museum of slights, each one still bleeding. And the tragedy is not only what they suffered, it is what they missed. All the rooms they could have built for themselves while they were busy knocking on the doors that stayed shut. All the peace that was available to them the moment they stopped needing the wrong people's approval. All the dignity they could have carried if they had understood, even once, that being left out of the wrong place is not a failure, but a form of grace. There is a particular sorrow in the last years of such a person, and it is worth looking at directly, because it is the thing you are trying to avoid. They reach an age when the doors have mostly stopped opening and closing at all, when the circles have thinned and the invitations have grown few, and instead of the peace that could have met them there, they find only the accumulated weight of every slight they never set down. They cannot enjoy their own company because they never learned to, having spent their whole lives fleeing it. They cannot trust the few who remain because they measured love by inclusion and never learned to read it any other way. Their endurance, which was real, was spent enduring the wrong thing. They endured rejection instead of outgrowing it. An endurance spent on the wrong thing is the saddest waste of a strong soul there is. The cruelest part of that ending is how avoidable it always was. Nothing kept that person outside their own peace but a habit of reading, a single reflex that turned every closed door into a courtroom where they were always the defendant and always guilty. That reflex could have been unlearned at any point along the way. It was never their circumstances that trapped them. Their circumstances were the same as everyone else's. A normal life with its normal share of doors that opened and doors that shut. What trapped them was the meaning they insisted on assigning again and again to things that meant no such thing. And the mercy in this, if you will take it, is that meaning is the one thing you always get to choose. The doors are not yours to control. What they mean has always been yours, entirely and without exception. Now consider the other kind of person, the one who learned to read the signs. When a door closed, they felt the hurt, and then they asked the older question, what was this keeping me from? They let the relief tell them the truth when it came. They recognized when they were being excluded for refusing to shrink, and they honored that refusal instead of undoing it. They trusted, by their conduct, if not always by their feelings, that the exclusion had cleared space for something they could not yet see. And slowly, across the years, their life filled with the right rooms and the right people, precisely because they had stopped forcing their way into the wrong ones. They aged into a rare kind of freedom. They could be left out of anything and remain entirely themselves because their worth had stopped depending on the verdict of any door. That freedom is available to you. It has always been available to you. The only thing standing between you and it is the habit of reading rejection as a judgment when so often it is a rescue. The difference between those two lives is not luck and it is not circumstance. It is discernment. It is the willingness to look at a closed door and ask what it might be protecting you from before you decide it is punishing you. That willingness is a practice, and like any practice, it strengthens with use. You are not too old to begin it. You are exactly old enough to have the material. You have decades of closed doors behind you, and every one of them is available for re-examination. Some of them will still hurt when you look at them again, but some of them, seen clearly now, will reveal themselves as the very moments your life was saved without your permission. So before this day ends, do 3 things. Go back to one exclusion that has haunted you for years, one door that closed and left a mark, and ask it the older question, not why was I left out, but what was I left out of, and honestly, would it have been good for me? Sit with the answer even if it surprises you. Let it revise the memory if the memory deserves revising. Then take one door that is closed against you right now, one exclusion you are still knocking at, and stop knocking, just for today. Turn your attention somewhere else. Give the space a chance to show you what it was clearing room for. Notice how it feels to have your energy pointed forward instead of backward. And last, name one standard. One thing you will require of the rooms and the people you give your time to from here on. Write it somewhere you will see it. Make it specific enough to hold up against a real room. Because the surest protection against the pain of the wrong belonging is knowing, clearly and without apology, what the right belonging actually looks like. You have been left out of enough places by others. It is time to start choosing, with your whole dignity intact, the few places worth walking into.